Hollywood in the late Golden Age glittered like a polished lie. Every streetlight on Sunset Boulevard shimmered as if it had been dipped in gold. Every nightclub hummed with laughter that sounded rehearsed. And every smile hid something sharp behind it. Fame here wasn't earned, it was negotiated. Respect wasn't given, it was calculated. And on this particular night, inside the velvet-draped ballroom of the Orion Hotel, Hollywood's elite had gathered to celebrate a box office record that no one would remember in 10 years, but everyone wanted credit for tonight. The room smelled of cigar smoke, expensive cologne, and ambition. At the center of it all stood Jack Callahan. Jack was everything Hollywood loved to sell. Tall, silver-haired, square-jawed, wearing a cream-colored cowboy-style suit that nodded to the Western films that had made him a legend. He was known as America's cowboy, the man who rode horses on screen as if he'd been born in the saddle and spoke about honor while studios quietly paid people to clean up his messes. Jack Callahan smiled like a man who had never been told no. Nearby, laughing politely with a drink untouched in his hand, stood Samuel "Sammy" Cole. Sammy didn't sparkle like Jack, but he glowed. He wore a simple black tuxedo, tailored but modest, and his posture was calm, almost restrained. His voice, when he spoke, carried warmth rather than volume. He was a singer, an entertainer, a man whose talent filled rooms even when he stood still. But Sammy knew something Jack didn't. In Hollywood, talent could open doors, but character decided how long they stayed open. Across the room, watching everything with quiet precision, was Dean Russo. Dean wasn't the loudest man in the room. He never needed to be. His presence worked differently, subtle, grounded, magnetic, in a way that didn't demand attention but commanded it anyway. He wore a dark suit, no flashy accessories, no forced charm. People gravitated toward him because he listened. And when he spoke, people remembered. Dean had been friends with Sammy for years. Not the kind of friendship that existed for photographs, but the kind built in dressing rooms, late-night rehearsals, and conversations when the applause faded. They had both learned early. Survival in Hollywood required more than talent. It required restraint. The evening moved smoothly at first. Champagne glasses clinked. Studio executives congratulated each other. Flashbulbs popped like tiny bursts of lightning. Someone announced another toast. Laughter rolled across the room in waves. Then Jack Callahan took the microphone. The room leaned in. Jack had always been good at this. He told stories like a man who believed every word deserved to be heard. His voice boomed comfortably, confidently, like someone used to owning space. "Well," Jack began, raising his glass, "I suppose tonight proves that good old-fashioned American stories still sell. Laughter, a man, a horse, and a clear line between right and wrong. More laughter." Jack's eyes scanned the room, hunting for reaction, hunting for approval. And then his gaze landed on Sammy. A pause. A smile sharpened. "You know," Jack continued, tilting his head slightly, "not everyone here had to work quite as hard to get their rhythm, if you catch my meaning." A few people chuckled, uncertain, nervous. Sammy's smile stayed in place. Jack pressed on. "I mean, some folks are just born with it. Music in their blood, timing in their bones." He laughed at his own joke. "Guess that's one kind of inheritance Hollywood doesn't talk about." The room shifted. Some people laughed a little louder out of discomfort. Others stared at their drinks. A few exchanged glances, silently asking, "Did he really just say that?" Sammy felt it immediately. Not the words themselves, but the intent behind them. He had heard this tone before 1,000 times. Always wrapped in humor. Always delivered with plausible deniability. Always followed by, "Relax, it was just a joke." Sammy kept his posture steady. He had learned long ago that reacting was often what people like Jack wanted. Across the room, Dean Russo's jaw tightened. He didn't move, didn't speak. But something in him shifted. Jack wasn't done. And hey, Jack added, leaning closer to the microphone, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. We're all friends here, right? Just a little humor. Don't go taking it the wrong way. A beat. Silence stretched longer than Jack expected. Sammy met Jack's eyes. There was no anger in his expression, no embarrassment. Just calm, dignified, unflinching. That unsettled Jack more than outrage ever could. Dean took a slow sip of his drink. He placed the glass down. Then he stood. The scrape of his chair against the floor sounded louder than the microphone. Conversation stalled. Heads turned. Dean walked toward the stage, not aggressive, just deliberate. Jack blinked. Dean. Hay was just having some fun here. Dean stopped a few feet from the microphone. He looked at Jack not with fury, but with something colder. Clarity. Funny thing about jokes, Dean said calmly. They usually rely on everyone laughing. The room was silent now. Jack chuckled nervously. Come on, Dean, don't start. Dean raised a hand, not sharply, just enough. No, he said evenly. You already did. He turned slightly, addressing the room. We all know why we're here, to celebrate success, talent, hard work. His eyes returned to Jack. But when humor punches down instead of lifting up, it stops being humor. It becomes a confession. A ripple passed through the crowd. Jack's smile faltered. Dean continued, voice steady. And tonight, you didn't confess anything about him. He gestured gently toward Sammy. You revealed something about yourself. Jack scoffed. Oh, don't be dramatic. Everyone knows I didn't mean anything by it. Dean nodded slowly. That's the problem. A few gasps. Dean stepped back from the microphone, turning toward Sammy. Sammy met his gaze, surprised but grateful. Dean didn't say another word. He didn't need to, because something had already changed. Jack Callahan still held the microphone. But for the first time in his career, the room wasn't listening. And Hollywood quietly, invisibly, had begun to turn its back. The applause never came back. What followed Dean's words wasn't outrage or shouting, it was worse. It was restraint. Polite distance. A kind of quiet that made people suddenly aware of where they stood and who was standing next to them. Jack Callahan laughed once, too loudly, then lowered the microphone. Well, he said, forcing cheer into his voice. Guess I stepped on a toe or two. No one responded. A few people clapped half-heartedly, but it felt mechanical, like a reflex they hadn't learned how to stop. Conversations restarted in whispers. Groups subtly shifted, rearranging themselves so that Jack was no longer at the center. Sammy didn't move. He stood exactly where he had been, hands relaxed at his sides, expression composed. Years in the spotlight had taught him how to hold still when the world tilted. He didn't want sympathy. He didn't want a scene. What he wanted, what he had always wanted, was to be treated like a professional in a room full of professionals. Dean walked back toward him. You okay? Dean asked quietly. Sammy nodded. I've heard worse. Dean studied him. Doesn't make it smaller. Sammy allowed himself a small, tired smile. No, but it makes it familiar. Across the room, Jack was already feeling the shift. People who had been eager to shake his hand moments earlier now seemed busy checking watches or refilling drinks. A studio executive he'd known for years gave him a brief nod instead of their usual shoulder clap. Another avoided eye contact entirely. Jack told himself it was nothing. Hollywood was dramatic. Tempers flared. By tomorrow, everyone would forget. But Hollywood didn't forget. It remembered selectively. The next morning, trade magazines ran polite summaries of the event. No headlines, no accusations. Just a single line in one column. An awkward moment briefly disrupted an otherwise celebratory evening. Jack read it twice, irritated, awkward. That was it. By noon, his agent called. Jack, the agent said carefully, we need to talk. Jack rolled his eyes. If this is about last night, it is, the agent interrupted. And it isn't. Jack sat up. What does that mean? It means 3 people called me this morning asking whether you're difficult right now. Difficult. Jack laughed. I made a joke. About the wrong thing, the agent replied. In the wrong room, at the wrong time. Jack's smile faded. You're overreacting. There was a pause on the line. I hope so, the agent said. Because if I'm not, this could get complicated. Meanwhile, Sammy returned to work. He rehearsed. He recorded. He showed up on time and left late. He answered questions with grace and deflected attention away from the incident without denying it happened. When a young reporter finally asked, "How did that moment make you feel?" Sammy answered honestly. It reminded me why I take my craft seriously, he said. Respect isn't automatic. You earn it every day by how you treat people when you think no one's watching. That quote traveled farther than the joke ever did. Dean, on the other hand, said nothing publicly. He didn't give interviews, didn't explain himself. He knew how Hollywood worked. Sometimes silence carried more weight than statements. Privately, however, phones rang. Producers called to thank him not loudly, not officially but enough for him to notice a pattern. You said what a lot of people were thinking, one said. We needed someone to say it out loud, said another. Jack Callahan noticed the pattern too only from the outside. A scheduled lunch with a director was postponed, then canceled. A script he'd been perfect for suddenly went in another direction. Meetings still happened, but they were shorter, less warm. At night, Jack replayed the moment in his head. The microphone. The joke, Dean's calm voice. He told himself he was being punished unfairly. But deep down, something else bothered him more. No one had defended him. Not loudly, not publicly, not at all. And that realization, quiet, undeniable, settled heavier than any headline ever could. Because in Hollywood, outrage fades, but silence. Silence is a verity. Jack Callahan had always believed his career was built on momentum. One hit led to another. One favor returned tenfold. Hollywood, to him, had always felt like a place where success insulated you from consequences. If you were big enough, people forgave you. If you were profitable enough, people overlooked you. That belief began to crack the week after the gala. It started with delays. His longtime publicist suggested lying low for a while. A magazine interview was pushed to next month, then removed entirely. A talk show appearance he'd done every year without question suddenly didn't fit the current lineup. Jack stared at his calendar, now filled with blank spaces where commitments used to be. This is temporary, he told himself. Just optics. But optics had a way of becoming reality. At a studio lot, Jack walked past posters of his old films, smiling younger versions of himself frozen in heroic poses. Crew members who once greeted him enthusiastically now nodded politely, sliding away as if contact alone might pull them into something uncomfortable. In a production meeting, a director avoided mentioning his name altogether, referring instead to the role as if Jack were already a ghost. For the first time in decades, Jack felt replaceable. Across town, Sammy Cole experienced something very different. He hadn't asked for attention, but it found him anyway, not because of the incident, but because of how he handled it. Invitations arrived quietly. Producers spoke to him with new seriousness. There was a subtle shift in tone, an unspoken recognition. This wasn't sympathy, it was respect. During a recording session, a young backup singer approached him hesitantly. My brother saw what happened, she said. He said it mattered. Sammy paused, then nodded. I'm glad he felt that. That was all. He didn't give speeches. He didn't frame himself as a symbol. He simply continued to show up with professionalism, knowing that dignity didn't need explanation. Dean Russo watched it all unfold with mixed emotions. He hadn't intended to make himself a focal point. He'd spoken because silence felt worse than risk. Still, consequences followed him, too, though not the kind Jack faced. A producer pulled Dean aside one afternoon. "You made some people uncomfortable," the man said carefully. Dean smiled slightly. "Truth tends to do that." The producer hesitated, then added, "But it also made other people feel safer." That sentence stayed with Dean longer than any compliment ever had. Jack's agent finally asked for a meeting. They sat in a quiet office overlooking the city. No smiles, no small talk. "Jack," the agent began, "studios are cautious right now." "About what?" Jack snapped. "A joke." "About patterns," the agent replied. "About perception. About whether working with you creates noise they don't need." Jack leaned back, crossing his arms. "So what you're saying, I'm canceled?" The agent shook his head. "No. I'm saying you're being evaluated, and evaluation feels a lot like isolation." That night, Jack sat alone in his house, television on but unwatched. He scrolled through old headlines praising his charm, his wit, his everyman appeal. None of it felt solid anymore. He wondered quietly, uncomfortably, how often people had laughed out of obligation rather than amusement. For the first time, Jack considered the possibility that the room had changed, not against him, but away from him, and that maybe it hadn't started at the gala. Maybe the gala had just revealed it. Meanwhile, Sammy and Dean met for coffee, away from cameras and crowds. "I didn't expect any of this," Sammy said. Dean nodded. "Neither did I." They sat in silence for a moment. "You know," Sammy added, "there was a time I would have smiled and let it pass. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I didn't think speaking up would change anything." Dean looked at him, and now, Sammy met his eyes. "Now I know silence teaches people what they're allowed to repeat." The city buzzed around them, indifferent and alive. In Hollywood, reputations weren't destroyed by explosions. They eroded, slowly, quietly, and somewhere between denial and realization. Jack Callahan was learning a lesson no script had ever taught him. Power doesn't disappear all at once. It leaves when people stop standing beside you. The invitation arrived without ceremony. No embossed lettering, no personal note. Just a standard email from a studio Jack Callahan had worked with for years, requesting a brief discussion regarding future collaboration. Jack read it 3 times. This was it, he told himself. The reset? The chance to straighten things out. He chose his words carefully on the drive over, rehearsing humility without sounding apologetic, confidence without sounding defensive. He had played men facing judgment on screen his entire life. Surely, he could manage it in real life. The conference room was smaller than he remembered. 2 executives sat across from him. One had a tablet. The other folded his hands as if preparing for difficult news. Jack the first said, "We appreciate you coming in." "Of course," Jack replied, smiling. "I'm excited about what's next." The second executive exchanged a glance with the first. "That's what we wanted to talk about," he said. "Right now, we're moving in a different direction." Jack's smile froze. "Different how?" "Different tone," the executive replied. "Different image." Jack leaned forward. "Oh. So, this is about that night." "It's about what followed," the first executive said calmly. "And what didn't?" Jack frowned. "I didn't think it needed a public apology." The room went quiet. "That," the executive said gently, "is part of the problem." Jack felt heat rise in his chest. "I've given decades to this industry." "And the industry has benefited," the executive replied, "but it's changing. Audiences are changing. What they tolerate, what they expect, it's different now." Jack stood. "So, that's it." "For now," the executive said, "we wish you the best." Outside, the sun was too bright. Jack sat in his car for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, feeling something unfamiliar tighten his throat. Across the city, Sammy Cole stood in a rehearsal hall filled with young performers. He wasn't there as a symbol. He was there because someone asked him to speak not about the incident, but about longevity. Talent opens doors, Sammy told them. But how you treat people decides how long those doors stay open. Someone asked if standing up ever came at a cost. Sammy paused. Yes, he said honestly. But so does staying quiet. Dean watched from the back of the room. He thought about how easily the night at the gala could have gone differently, how easily he could have stayed seated, how easily Sammy could have been left alone with the weight of that moment. But ease had never been the same as right. Jack's cost came later, in smaller moments. The calls that didn't return. The agent who stopped pitching him aggressively. Hush. The scripts that never arrived. His name wasn't dragged through the press. It simply faded from conversations that once centered around him, and fading hurt more than outrage ever could. One evening, Jack saw Sammy on television, singing, confident, unburdened. The audience stood, applauding. Jack turned off the screen. For the first time, he didn't feel anger, felt clarity. The joke hadn't ended his career. His refusal to reckon with it had. In a city built on performance, the hardest role was accountability, and not everyone learned it in time.